So we still have the open economy, the small open economy. And of course, unlike the last time, here we are going to introduce in money. So when you introduce in money in small open economy, it is more or less like the monetary intertemporal model. But here you have to have a different view of how money is going to play out. Because the money happens to be used between two countries or between two economies, because you open it up, there's a need for us to have the price of the money. So that's where exchange rate comes in. The idea of exchange rate comes in. So money is not as internal as it used to be. Money is now used worldwide or between two countries who have two different currencies, and they will have to exchange these currencies. So with an open economy and money, the most important thing that comes out of it is the exchange rate. So there's going to be exchange rate here. And that's where our argument will start from today. So with exchange rate, there are two things that we have to keep in mind. Whenever you hear exchange rate, the very first part of exchange rate is something that we call a nominal exchange rate. And the second part is what we call a real exchange rate. So these are two different understanding of what an exchange rate is. And I'll take you guys through the two as in what they mean in terms of the real and in terms of the nominal. Now, what do we mean by a nominal exchange rate? Now, a nominal exchange rate is basically the price of one currency in terms of the other. So for this class, our understanding of a nominal exchange rate will be the price of the domestic currency in terms of one unit of the foreign currency. So keep that one in mind. This definition is going to be very important. So with a nominal exchange rate, it's going to be the price of the domestic currency in terms of one unit of foreign currency. So this is going to be very important because in other textbooks, what you see is the price of a foreign currency in terms of one unit of a domestic currency. Here we are switching it. So keep in mind how the textbook tends to define what a nominal exchange rate is. So if everyone is okay with this definition, an example is maybe for you to purchase one USD, one United States dollars, you will need maybe 1.5 Canadian to purchase this guy. So this is what they call a nominal interest rate. So because US is our foreign currency, Canadian will be our local currency or our domestic currency. So this guy here is what you see in the textbook to be labeled as E, small e. So this is our nominal exchange rate. Any question in there? Any question in there, Jessica?
Nope, we're good.
Good. Now, in terms of real exchange rate is more or less like pricing goods in terms of both the currency and then the good. So here, nominal real exchange rate is given to us in terms of the standard notation. It's just going to be real exchange rate equals, you multiply E with a P, and I'm going to put two P's here. The very first P you see on top is what we call the foreign currency. So, sorry, the foreign variable. So whenever you see P star, it means the foreign price of the good. So for you to define what a real exchange rate is, real exchange rate is always in terms of good, in terms of real goods, whilst nominal is in terms of a currency to a currency. So keep that one in mind. So this guy here is going to be the definition of what a real exchange rate is. Jessica, was that you?
Sorry, we're good.
Okay.
No questions.
So we have the real exchange rate given to us. We have the nominal exchange rate given to us. If you want to see an example of it, you can just go to the textbook. They give a situation where you have the nominal exchange rate and the price of the foreign good given to us, and you can clearly see what the real exchange rate is. So I'm going to skip from here and introduce you guys to a new idea, which in macro, they call it either the law of one price or the purchasing power parity. With this, you might have to play around with it to see what conditions are going to be met. So with the law of one price, we are going to base our argument on the real exchange rate. So keep this guy in mind. So I'm going to take away this guy. So I'm going to use the real exchange rate again and introduce you guys to the purchasing power parity. So we have this guy here. Real exchange rate, remember, happens to be real exchange rate equals E multiplied by P star. P star means foreign, all over local. Now, the law of one price basically says that the price of the domestic currency, the price of the domestic good should be the same as the price of the foreign good. So that's the whole argument. The price of the domestic should be the same as the price of the foreign in terms of their pricing. So if this is my real exchange rate, a situation where I have E of P star, so this is how much I'll have to pay for a foreign to buy a foreign good. This is how much I'll have to pay to buy a foreign good. And this is how much I'll have to pay to buy a domestic one. Now, the law of one price says that the price that you have to pay for foreign should be the same as the price that you have to pay for the local. So I'm going to write law of one price here. Foreign should be the same as local. There are a couple of situations where this condition wouldn't hold. Empirically, it doesn't hold. But if this is what our assumption says, we have to examine a situation where it doesn't hold. So take a situation where the foreign is greater than the domestic. So if you happen to be in the world economy, so this will be the question to the class. If you happen to be in the world economy and the price of the foreign is greater than the price of your domestic, which one will you go for? Anyone to help me? Jessica was there?
Domestic.
Domestic, okay. So the law of one price, or the PPP, purchasing power parity. So most of you, as Jessica pointed out, you go for the domestic. So most of you will go for this guy. Now, when you go for this guy, when I have a situation where the demand for a particular good is high, what happens to its price? When the demand for a good is high, exactly, the price increases. So the demand for this guy goes up. When the demand goes up, the price tends to go up. And as the price goes up, what happens to this sign? Anyone to help me? What happens to the sign? Exactly, it will come back to be the same, right? So that's where the issue of law of one price comes in. So in the situation where it doesn't hold, this will be the market reaction. And as the market reacts, we come back to the law of one price. You might want to look at the situation where the prices of the foreign happens to be less. Use the same argument and it will give you the law of one price. Is that okay? Questions in there?
Nope, no questions here.
Good. Now that we are down the law of one price, what you tend to see here is if the law of one price holds, it means this guy, the price of the domestic, the price of the foreign, will be the same as the price of the domestic. Now, what do we see here? I'm going to shift this guy to this side, or I'm going to shift this guy to this side. Either way should work. For the sake of space, I'm just going to shift this guy to this side. So I have this guy here, P star, divided by P. Anyone to remind us what this formula is? What's this formula, please? Exactly. What's that? Real exchange.
Yeah.
So this is the real exchange rate, right? I'm going to make out an argument here. The argument here is that if the law of one price hold, I can shift the prices to this side and I have this guy standing out. What will be the real exchange rate if it holds?
1.
It's going to be 1. The real exchange rate is just going to be 1. Right? It's just going to be 1. So this guy is going to be 1. So I'm going to derive the math again, and let's see whether we follow. So as you guys just pointed out, it's just going to be 1. So we have the prices of the foreign should be the same as the prices of the local if the purchasing power parity holds. Now, if this is the case, I can shift P to this side. So divide those sides by P. Divide both sides by P. This guy cancels this guy. So I have 1 equals E P star over P. Now, what do we call E P star over P? That's what John called as the real exchange rate. So if I'm to ask you in your exam, prove that whenever the purchasing power parity holds, then the real exchange rate equals 1. This will be the steps involved. Is that okay? All good, Jessica?
Yep, no questions.
Good. So if we are now with the law of one price, we now need to move ahead and look at what we call the types of exchange rate, whether we have a fixed exchange rate, whether we have a flexible exchange rate. So let me see what I have here in the textbook. Yeah, so the types of exchange rate that you might come across, and this is going to be very important because our policy will depend on it. The policy that we have in an economy will depend on whether we have a fixed exchange rate or a flexible exchange rate. So these are the two types of exchange rates, flexible and fixed. Under the flexible exchange rate, this is where you allow the market to determine what the price of your exchange rate is. You allow demand and supply to play out. You don't control anything, and the exchange rate automatically determines itself. The nominal exchange rate will just determine itself. In the fixed exchange rate, this is where you assume a certain amount or a certain price for your exchange rate. And when the market reacts and it goes above that price, you come in and correct it for it to come back to where you assume it to be. So these are the two policies involved. Flexible, you are very flexible. Just let the market determine. It might go up, it might go down. It's just okay. Let the market determine what the price is. So you might see this guy as the same as a floating exchange rate. With a fixed exchange rate, you assume a certain amount as the price of your currency, E bar. When it goes above E bar, you come in and correct it back to E bar. When it goes beyond below it, you come in and correct it and bring it back to E bar. A situation might be a country that has, pegged its exchange rate to the United States dollars. So it says that for every 1 unit of its currency, it goes with this amount of USD. And that's going to be its fixed. So within each regime, there are a couple of things that you have to look out for. Within the fixed exchange rate, it might be a hard policy, it might be a soft policy, it might be a combination of the both. Within the flexible, mostly pretty much flexible. So when you are running a flexible regime, this is your currency, you are allowing it to move up and down by the market forces. Whenever it increases, based on this cost, whenever it goes up, we call it depreciation because you need more to buy the USD. And whenever it goes down, we call it appreciation. If you want to understand this further, take the situation where you have USD. If you have 1.5 Canadian to buy you 1 USD, and you now have 0.5 Canadian to buy you 1 USD, because you now need less Canadian to buy the same amount of USD, we call this movement an appreciation. And that's what we see here. This is an appreciation. So whenever you need less of your domestic currency to buy a unit of the foreign currency, we call it an appreciation. Is that okay?
Yeah,
all good?
good.
Good. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of the fixed exchange rate, you might also have a situation where it might go up and down. And when it goes up, we call it devaluation, which is the same consistent with the depreciation, but here we call it devaluation. And when it goes down, we call it a revaluation. So please keep these terminologies in mind because you see them playing out in the next chapter, sorry, in the next subchapter. So I'm done with the definition of exchange rate. I'm done with understanding what a flexible is, what a fixed is. Why not go ahead and do the exercise that we did last week, but here with the addition of money. See whether money is neutral, see whether flexible exchange rates can help us. Yeah, John, you have a question?
I have one question. Yeah.
Sure.
The change in terminology represents that in a fixed system, the changes are made by the government rather than by market.
For the fixed, yeah. For the fixed, it's made by the government or the central bank. Yeah. So we call it either they devalue their currency or they revalue their currency. So that's why the word is revalue or devalue by the central bank or by the government. And that's fixed. But for the case of flexible, it's determined by the market. So the currency is either appreciating by itself or it's either depreciating by itself because the market determines it. That's why there's a need for us to differentiate between the two terminologies. Is that okay, John? Okay, yeah, sure. Now let's open up the markets. We're now going to open up the markets, but our attention will be coming from this side. We will look at this guy here, which is a flexible exchange rate in terms of how the market plays out. So I'm going to take off this guy here, and I'm now going to tackle the world economy, but with the flexible exchange rate. So keep in mind, as we open up the market, it might be the situation where we as a country, we happen to run a flexible exchange rate regime, or it might be a situation where we as a country, we happen to run a fixed exchange rate regime. So keep these two guys in mind because they have two different implications as our economy tends to experience a couple of shocks. So I'm going to start with the flexible regime where we allow our currency to move up and down regardless. With a flexible regime, let's see what plays out here. So remember, we had this equation here, which is a money demand equation, which comes from the price as R and this. So this was the money demand. Now we need to make a couple of changes. The very first change we need to make to this equation is this guy here. Because we've opened up our economy to the world, our interest rate is no more domestic, but it is the world interest rate that we need to go with, which is fixed and we cannot change it, right? It's market determined by the world. So we cannot change it. Now that we have the additional equation here, which is the law of one price, which basically says that P equals E, P star, then I think it's safe for me to say that we can now transfer this guy back to this guy. Remember, P is the same as P, so we can now transfer this guy back here. So this equation now becomes money demand.
One question here.
Yeah, sure, feel free. Yeah, read it out. Sorry.
We always assume PPP holds.
Yeah, we assume PPP holds to make our life easier. If not, then we have issues. You know, we have inequalities, and there's no way we can work it out. Yeah. So for now, we assume it holds, even though in the real world, Alex, it doesn't hold. It's very hard to hold in the short run. But in the long run, it's most likely to hold. In the long run, even in the empirical data, it might hold in the long run. But in the short run, it wouldn't hold. But even though we are running the short run model here, if we don't use PPP, then it will be difficult for us to get our model up and running. Yeah. So we have this guy here, and we have E, P star here, L, Y, R star. So this now becomes our model. We do not have domestic price in there. It has been changed with the foreign price multiplied by the exchange rate. We do not have the domestic interest rates. We now have the foreign interest rates. And again, we assume money supply doesn't change that much. So inflation is zero. So this is what we have. Now we can draw this on a graph. And please keep in mind the changes that we have here. The changes that we have here is going to be very key on this graph. So this guy here is going to be the same money demand and money supply. The same money demand function, but remember this guy is now a function of E, P star, as a function of Y and R star. Now here we replace it with a nice E, and that's the nominal exchange rate. That's a major, the key difference here. And we have the money supply either by the central bank or by the government, whichever institution you might want to go with is fine. So we have the money supply given to us. So at the end of the day, we have the exchange rate to be determined for us. And remember, under this policy, I'm going with a flexible exchange rate. So keep that one in mind. So our setup for the money market is ready. Our setup for the money market is ready for the flexible exchange rate when we open up the economy. All good? Questions? Alex, John?
No, we're good.
Okay. Now, given that we have this guy here, why not go back and start what we did earlier? We would like to prove the neutrality of money. With this, I'm trying to prove the neutrality of money. So remember, the neutrality of money holds when we don't assume sticky price. So when we go further to the new Keynesian model within this same chapter, then we will see the stickiness in price, which will violate the neutrality of money assumption. But for now, we don't have the sticky price assumption, so we can go ahead and analyze the market and see whether the neutrality of money holds. All good? So let's take the situation where the central bank has indicated that it is interested in increasing the money supply. So it's going to increase the money supply from here to here. So this guy is going to go up. Now, what do we see? What we see here is with an increase in money supply, this guy here goes up. So exchange rate moves from E1 to E2. Now, what do we call this movement from E1 to E2? Anyone to help me? What term do we give it? Moving from E1 to E2, what is the terminology given to it? Depreciation.
Depreciation?
Yeah, that's correct. It's going to be depreciation, right? So this guy here is going to be depreciation. How do we prove the neutrality of money assumption? Remember, with the neutrality of money, we assume that whenever money increases, the prices do have to increase with the same proportion, and all the variables in the demand market for labor and the goods market wouldn't change. Is that true here? Let's see how it holds out. So money supply has increased, and what we've seen here is there is a depreciation in our currency. Now let's go back to the law of one price, or the purchasing power parity or the real exchange rate definition. Remember, we have a situation where P star multiplied by E is the same as P. What we did here was to change the money supply in our domestic market as a central bank. And what that did was, because this guy is from foreign, nothing changes in the foreign market. What happens here was the fact that E tends to increase. So if this guy is fixed and this guy has gone up, what happens to this guy? What happens to domestic price? You want to help me? The foreign price is fixed, exactly. It goes up.
Increase.
Exactly. So with an increase in money supply, our currency depreciates, and finally, the price of our goods also tends to go up. So money is neutral. The real money supply is not affected. So this guy is technically neutral. Money is neutral in this economy. You might also want to see it from the money equation. So we have M equals E P star L Y as a function of R. I can move this guy back here and put a P star here, take this guy out. Put a P star here. Nothing has changed here. This guy is going to be an E. Money supply has increased, and E has also increased with the same proportion. So nothing has changed. Nothing has changed in the economy. No real variable is going to be affected. So when we change something domestically, we don't expect anything to change in the foreign market. And the only thing that we expect to change here is that the price will move in the same proportion. And at the end of the day, the real market wouldn't be affected. So I'm going to stop here and then ask questions if you have questions with this domestic analysis.
We have one question here.
Sure.
As long as we know that P increases in the same way as money supply, then we prove that neutrality of money. That neutrality only implies changes start from money supply, and any possible ways that change start from money demand.
No, there's no changes in money demand as of now, right? So that's why I try using that money demand equation to show you what's going in there. You might want to say there is a change in money demand, which is fine with me, right? Just by pushing this guy back to this guy and tell me that, hey, E is going to go up. But technically, we wouldn't see a shift in the money demand line. So that wouldn't be a perfect way of looking at it. Is that okay, Alex? Yeah.
We have another question.
Sure.
But in older models, if the interest rate went up or down and money demand were affected, it would still be neutral or correct?
It depends, right? So for the exchange, for the interest rate is not nominal. Interest rate is real. Okay, so interest rates affect the real market. If you look at the labor market, you see interest rate in there, which is a real factor. If you look at the goods market, you see interest rates in there, which is a real factor. So interest rate is not nominal. The argument about neutrality of money comes from variables that we consider to be nominal. An example is money supply and price. These are nominal things, right? So whenever one goes up, the other follows, and that's the end of it. But when you consider factors like interest rates, we call it the real interest rate because it affects the real market here.
Because money demand relies on two real variables and there's no way for change in it to be neutral.
Yeah, so there's no real interest rate factor playing a role here. So the only factors we are looking at are the changes in money supply and how that's, just go ahead and then affects the price. So I'm going to clean this guy if there are no further questions. If there are questions, I'm going to wait.
And we have another question.
Yeah.
In your second proof using money demand equation, we don't address the fact that price increases because the increase in money supply and E are equal.
Yeah, you might want to say that because remember, prices are the same as a combination of these two. So you can either go with this guy and tell me that prices directly goes up, or you might go with the demand equation. At the same time, just by putting E here, this whole factor represents price. So you might say that with an increase in money supply and P star being fixed, E will go up with the same proportion. That's equally fine with me. Yeah. Because when you multiply E with a P star, you end up with P. So that's fine as well. So the real market wouldn't be affected. Further questions? And remember, E is also nominal. It's not going to affect anything in the real market. That's why we call it the nominal exchange rate. So E is nominal as well. So keep in mind what are the nominal variables as you play along with this model. Is that okay, Jessica?
We good. We good.
Good. So let's quickly go in here. So we are done with analyzing how the market tends to respond to changes to what happens in the market. So what if there is a change in the foreign market rather? Now this is where you have to keep an eye on. What if there is a change in the foreign market? An example is there's a change in foreign price. So we have this guy here. We have this guy here, which is our money demand equation, which is E, P star, L, Y, R. So then we have the money supply, we have the exchange rates here, we have the E here, we have M here. Now, what I'm going to analyze here is the foreign market experiencing a couple of shocks, and this shock is nominal. So keep in mind. So we are going to analyze foreign nominal shock in price. We are going to analyze foreign nominal shock in price. So an example is, let's assume the situation where the foreign money supply has gone up, which tends to increase the foreign prices nominally. This is just an example. So the central bank of all the foreign countries surrounding you have increased their money supply, and the implication is that the foreign prices are going to increase. Will that affect your money market, and will that affect your real market? Let's see what plays out here. With this P star going up, we can see that there is a P star here, and this guy is also going to increase. So when this guy goes up, we expect this line to also shift towards this direction. At the end of the day, what do we see here? We see that E will come down here. What do we call this movement? From E1 to E2. Anyone to help me? What do we call that? From E1 to E2. Yeah.
Appreciation.
Right? So this guy is just an appreciation. Now the question here is, will it affect your real market? Let's see how to prove that. You might want to use the usual, the law of one price. So the law of one price says that P is the same as E multiplied by P star. So initially we saw an increase in P star. So I'm going to shift the P star up. What did we see change again? Anyone to help me? After the increase in P star, what changed from this analysis? When P star went up, what changed? Exactly, E decreased. Exactly, E decreased. So P star is up and E is down. Let's assume they go with the same proportion. What happens to the prices in the market? What happens to the prices in the market? And exactly, they'll stay the same. So this guy is just going to be fixed. Yeah, so this guy is going to be fixed. So when there's a foreign shock and you have a flexible exchange rate, you allow your exchange rate to move, then your exchange rate can take care of this shock. Your prices wouldn't be affected in the market. And if your prices are not affected in the market, your real market wouldn't be affected either. So you are very, very safe from what's happening. So your real interest, your Y is not affected, your labor supply is not affected, your labor demand is not affected, everything remains the same.
We have one question.
Go for it.
But the exchange rate can affect the real market then.
You said?
But the exchange rate can affect the real market.
In what sense? If only it goes through price, right? So if, for instance, right, and I think I'll come back to that. When there is a real effect, I'll come back to that. But here, this guy is just nominal exchange rate. And because you are running a flexible regime, it is changing in accordance with the foreign price change. So it can take care of the shock for you. So your prices are not affected, and it will not be translated to your goods and your goods market or your labor market, right?
So it will not affect NX, net export?
That will be a good question. But remember, the real interest rate in the world hasn't been changed. So you still maintain the goods market, right? So remember, Alex, we saw this real interest rate here. We saw the Y here. This was your output demand. This was your output supply, and the real interest rate is here. And this is where it will forever be, unless, of course, the real interest rate gets affected. Now, the question here is the real interest rate affected? Right? Because remember, the only way you shift your YD is that the real interest rate has been changed. So you have to move in accordance with that, given your NX.
Oh, when money supply increase initially, why don't we shift money supply in our graph? In our graph?
Yeah, because this money supply wasn't coming from us, right? This money supply was coming from a foreign market. So they will have to shift their money supply in their market because we didn't change it. This money supply is from us, but we didn't change our money supply.
Okay.
Is that okay, guys?
Yeah, we good.
Yeah, Alex, was your question answered? I understand where you are coming from.
So are we considering that only R affects net NX?
You might want to consider it that way for now, just to keep it very simple, but understand where you are coming from. You are coming from the fact that with a reduction in, with an appreciation, we are supposed to have a net export going up and all that. I understand that. But for now, let's just keep it simple to keep the analysis. Yeah. Yeah, I understand where you are coming from. Yeah, for sure.
So we have, I guess, because exchange rate is nominal and it doesn't affect net NX.
Mm-hmm. It will affect NX if we expand the model and do a couple of analysis. It will affect NX in a way. But again, because the R is fixed, the effects on NX will be outdone by the effect in the absorption. So we come back to the same YD. So that wouldn't be an interesting analysis to look at, right? So technically, when your exchange rate is up, you might want to call, what do we call it? When you have appreciation, it's most likely that you have a positive current account or positive net exports. This guy will shift up. But because of this R, there's a need for a couple of changes in your C, I, and your G. And that might bring this guy back to normal, where we have to have it. Yeah. Alice, let me know if you have questions, and John, let me know if you have questions.
So back to our graph, domestic real economy will not be affected, right?
Yeah, yeah, the real economy wouldn't be affected. Yeah.
Wouldn't appreciation lead to an increase in imports and a decrease in CA?
Exactly, that will be the case. So if you say that, I will shift this guy to this side. But again, what I would like you guys to pay attention here is the fact that your real interest rate for the world hasn't changed. So even if this line is to shift to this line, there's a need for us to come back to this R. Remember last week's assumption. If the real interest rate for the world happens to be at a specific point, regardless of what's happening in your domestic market, you have to come back to that same point, right? So when I understand your argument, but at the same time, this guy will have to come back to this. And this might be from looking at it from either
So Y will shift to restore equilibrium at R star?
Not necessarily, because the R hasn't changed. So Y star is not going to change. No. R star hasn't changed, so Y star wouldn't shift. Yeah. So shoot your questions if you have any. Yeah. Questions? So the most
not Y star, it's YS. Y will shift to right.
Y will shift. What do you mean by that, John? Yeah, anything that will restore your R star will be restored. But again, there wouldn't be any changes in the raw market. You still come back to your Y star. That's the argument here, okay? So I have 10 minutes to finish the raw effects, which will look at the direct effects on the interest rate, and hopefully that might clarify it the more. Would that be fine if I go ahead with it, or if you got, do you guys think you need further questions? Okay, should I go ahead? Okay,
yeah,
good. So this guy here has the indication that a foreign nominal shock, which means foreign price increase, will not affect the raw market. It will only be absorbed by this nominal exchange rate. Now let's use the same argument, but here, instead of a foreign nominal shock, I'm going to use what we call a foreign real shock. So this is going to be a foreign real shock to the market. So here we have a situation where we have a foreign real shock in real interest rates. So if you happen to be around, type your full name and type present. And please give me extra 5 minutes or 4 minutes, if you don't mind. Yeah. So we are going to look at the foreign real shock pretty quick in the next 10 minutes. So what happens to your market when there's a foreign real shock? So here, things are going to change. The very first thing here is when there is a foreign real shock, which means R star has increased due to productivity decrease in other foreign markets or what's not. So we have R star increase. So we have this guy here. We are looking at the goods market. So this happens to be our initial YD. This happens to be our initial YS. And this happens to be our initial R star 1. Now, because of this foreign increase in interest rates, it will move to R2 star. So we'll move towards this direction. Now, there's a need for us to compensate for this change from the net export perspective, just like what we saw from last Thursday. So this guy will then have to move towards this direction. The YD will increase, most likely because of the increase in the net export. So this guy comes here, and this guy comes here. So we have YD increasing towards this direction, most likely because of the increase in the net export. Most likely because of that, because that's what we need to use to compensate for this change. Is that okay? Now, why do we see an increase in YS along this line? YS will also increase because the real interest rate has increased. So if RS has increased, the labor supply will increase and the amount of supply will also increase. So we have two factors playing a role. So this will be the basis of it. Now, if this is the basis of it, one might also argue that with an increase in interest rates, there are two things that might play a role. When interest rates increases, Y, R is a function of interest rates, I is a function of interest rate plus G and what's not. When this guy goes up and this guy goes up, we expect consumption to reduce and we expect investment to reduce. So technically, we also expect a reduction from the YD. So consumption is going down, investment is going down. But for consumption, there is another effect. Because YD has increased and YS has increased, there's going to be an income effect. And from this income effect perspective, whenever there's an income effect increment, we expect to see that C will also increase. So if you want to analyze this effect carefully, we can't say anything about the consumption.
We can't see your screen. Great.
Sorry, let me just, sorry. Is that okay now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can't say anything about consumption because from the income, from the interest rates, consumption needs to come down, while from the income, consumption needs to go up. So we don't know much about consumption. For interest rate is going to go down. Now let's see what happens to the money market. Again, let's see what happens to the money market. Now the money market is going to be a bit tricky. So please keep an eye on it and ask questions if you have any. So this is the money market. We have this guy to be the demand, which is E as a function of P star, as a function of L, as a function of R, and this guy. We have E here, we have money supply here. We have money demand there as well. We have the exchange rate here. Now the question here is, with this change in the goods market, Y is going to increase. And remember, whenever Y increases, money demand increases. That's the first part of the argument. But another part of the argument also says that interest rate has increased. And we know that when interest rate increases, money demand falls. So at the end of the day, we don't know what happens to money demand in the market. So this is a bit confusing, right? We don't know which one outweighs the other. Now let's take a stand. Let's assume that the effect that we have on money demand based on income increments is higher than this. So Y effect is greater than the interest rate effect. If that's the case, then we expect an increase in money demand. So money demand is going to go up. So this guy is going to move towards this direction, and then we have this guys, and then we have R star also increasing. So at the end of the day, what do we see? We see that the exchange rate, what do we call this? I think appreciation, right? Exchange rate tends to appreciate. Is that okay with everyone? Is that okay? Jessica, no question?
Yeah, no question.
So at the end of the day, we tend to see that exchange rates will appreciate. Now the question here is, will it be just a nominal change or what's not? Let's see. It's not going to be a nominal change because for sure you've seen that the money, the goods market was affected. Let's analyze it from the law of one price perspective. Right? So here, P star hasn't changed. This guy is down. What happens to the prices? Anyone to help me? What happens to the prices in the market? Anyone to help me?
Goes down?
It goes down. Exactly. It goes down. So we have a reduction in price, right? So here you can see that with the foreign shock, that happens to be a real shock. Prices of the domestic good tends to be affected. Unlike the first case, which is the prices of the domestic good wouldn't be affected if the shock happens to be just a nominal shock. So keep in mind the type of shocks that they are faced with and where exchange rate will come in and play a role. Is that okay? Now, if the central bank has a policy of always keeping this guy to the fix, it has a policy of always keeping the domestic currency, the domestic prices to the fix. What should happen here? what should happen in the money market? Someone to should propose something. The central bank has a policy of always keeping their prices to be fixed.
Exactly. Money supply.
Correct. So what's the name of the student again? The one who answered first? Is it Shane?
Xin Wang.
Xin Wang, do you mind sending me your email? I probably have to keep a track of that response. You might have to get extra marks for that. The central bank will have to increase the money supply to keep this EI to be fixed. And with this fixed EI, this will be a fixed P as well. So that's the effect in the goods market. Sorry, with the real shock. Now I'm done. If you have questions, please ask. Feel free to ask. Just a quick one. You know, I've started the Python workshop from yesterday. The videos have been uploaded on my web page. You can have a look at it, and you can join us on Wednesday and Friday as well. I encourage you guys to join in, and if you have questions, you can ask as well. So my workshop is just this. Monday was the first day. We have the video uploaded. Wednesday we'll continue with it, and Friday we'll finish with it. You know how to create an app. You know how to send an app out and all that.
So no tutorial today, right?
No, there's tutorial, right? I believe, right? Why is it there? Why don't we have a tutorial today? We have a tutorial. So I'm just eating into your tutorial time. I'll just tell him. Don't worry. Questions? If any questions?
I think we're good.
Okay then. I'll see you guys on Thursday.
So are you open to answer a question after tutorial?
Yeah, sure. Feel free. You can. Why not tomorrow, which is my office hours? John, will that be fine? Yeah, the usual office hours, 1:30 to 3:30 every Wednesday. So yeah, the same time. Yeah. If you have questions, just come in and ask. Okay. See you guys on I believe Thursday. Bye bye. Sure.